Hey, we're the Call Guys. I'm David.
And I'm George.
We are blessed today to have Julius Scott with us. Julius is with Lexington Richland School District 5. Always, your school district, Julius, is a tongue twister for me. I don't
Absolutely.
know why.
Absolutely.
Um, it's rare, that you have school districts that cross county lines, but yours does.
Absolutely.
So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Brought to you by Dick Dyer, Mercedes-Benz, the first Mercedes-Benz in South Carolina.
Julius is also a fellow Optimist member with George and I out Optimist Club in the Irmo St. Andrews area. So it's been a blessing to have you join us, and glad to have the school district through you invested in working with us to raise funds for local youth charities, and that's But as we've gotten to know you and here today to talk about the work you're doing, that kind of fits you as a person. So why don't you take a second here, just introduce yourself to our audience, tell them a little bit about what you do, and how you've gotten an education from where you started to where you are now, sir.
For sure. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm honored to be here. And thank you for creating a platform for your audience and for stories to be shared about work that's going on in School District 5. I am from Columbia, South Carolina, so born and raised, didn't venture out too far. Had my mother had her way, I would have joined the military and been all over the world, but that just wasn't in the cards for me. Graduate of Richland School District 1, Benedict College undergrad, South Carolina grad school. Taught 3 years in Richland School District 2, and ultimately wanted to become a school administrator. And my thinking was, hey, I want to become an administrator, both the elementary and middle level. Never considered high school just because they work all the time. They never close. Right? Never close. And so I just didn't want, I didn't want that life. I wasn't man enough for that. But nonetheless, at the end of my third year of teaching, which is just kind of crazy as I look back over it, at the time I went to a middle school conference, and I missed the conference, but I ran into who at the time was an administrator at Dutch Fork High School, Helen Anderson, who ultimately became our chief of instruction. And she said to me at that time, Julius, we need to get you in School District 5. And I had never considered working in our system. Well, it's 20 years later. And so in that process of time, thankfully, I was able to be picked up and began my career at River Springs Elementary as an administrator, 6 years at Nursery Road Elementary as an assistant principal, and then 12 years as principal at Dutch Fork Elementary Academy of Environmental Sciences.
Nice,
Yes, sir.
nice. So you and I have had this discussion offline, but we have kind of a similar track with our time in education. There's no way in the world you could have gotten me into a high school as a principal. No, thank you. No how.
Right.
No.
And listen, the high school guys say the same thing about us elementary folks. Like, there's no way that I would ever work in elementary school. Are you crazy?
So,
Well,
Julius, why don't you shared with us about your journey to get to where you are now, but
Right.
share with us a little bit about what you're doing now and
man.
how that idea, the Harbison Garden and your community initiative started.
For sure. So it did not originate with me. So I want to be clear on that. That started with our superintendent, Dr. Ross, who in March of 2023, he sends me a text and like, hey, you got a second to meet. And I think I told Dave, it's the superintendent. So what am I going to say? Nah, Dr. Ross, just a little tied up. Come on down.
Those texts are like a little double-edged sword,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Because you don't know which side of the sword you're going to get
Had
when you
no
get
clue.
them.
But I will give him credit. He did say to me, listen, I'm not here for anything that is troubling or concerning. Like he was very clear up front. So that definitely released some of my anxiety. And so he came in and just said, hey, this is what we've been working on for the last couple of years. Just the notion that school systems predominantly focus on the work that we do during the structure of a school day. So arrival, 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock until the end of the school day, which is what most school systems do across the country. But he had a vision to say kids need support well beyond the school day. And typically we don't create positions to support families beyond the school day. Brilliant notion, brilliant idea, but he also looked at some data and specifically looking at, for some groups of students, what does out of school time look like for them? And I think most people don't realize this, but students spend more time outside of school than they do during the school day over time. And so he was able to pull together a group of community partners to say, what if we change the trajectory of how we support kids beyond the school day, and began looking at beyond school hours. And then they looked at some data across our district to say, where do we see the greatest need by community and not by school? So what does that look like by zip code? And if you understand and know our district, the northernmost parts are Chapin. Obviously, we see that kids do extremely well academically. They're in school regularly, and from a discipline standpoint, really don't run into many issues. And then when we look at the polar opposite, the southernmost part of our system, those numbers they vary greatly. And so many of those students, not that they're less than or lack the intellectual capacity of their peers, we do recognize that a higher number of students struggle academically, discipline challenges are greater, as well as attendance in school. And so that was the genesis of what I'm doing. And so he approached me to say, hey, I think you're the guy that we need for this position. Ultimately, we want to begin our work in Harbison Gardens, and we use data to determine Harbison Gardens. So it wasn't just randomly selected, but it was based on 3 data points that we figured this might be a good starting place for us.
And for people that don't know, could you give us kind of a background on what Harbison Gardens is, where it's located?
Absolutely. So Harbison Gardens is an apartment complex, Section 42. I won't get into that, but you have Section H apartments and you have Section 42. Section H has a lot of rules and regulations in place. Section 42, not so much. We have roughly about 150 families who live out in this community. It is literally a stone's throw away from Columbiana Mall. So 150 families, about 220 students that attend School District 5, and that is literally from 4K up to high school seniors.
Yeah. So Dr. Ross has this idea. Y'all go do some research, sit down, you decide that Harbison Gardens is your place. What were the initial goals of this? I mean, because I know they have grown since the inception of it.
Yep.
But what were the initial goals? And then talk to us a little bit about how this has grown since.
Sure.
You decided to step out of the principal role and into kind of a community advocate role for the school district,
and a one-man team at that.
Right. So
yeah,
I think that just one important plug I have to make. So before I gave him my answer, and I shared this with you both, I had to share my story with Dr. Ross in terms of why I thought this would be work that aligned with who I am. And so I shared with him, I'm from a family of 6. I was born in the Latimer Manor apartment complex, which is Section H housing in Columbia. My mother's schizophrenic, and unfortunately, my siblings and I did not grow up in the same household. So my upbringing is very similar to many of the families that ultimately live in Harbison Gardens. And so for me, it was a no-brainer to say, if I get the opportunity to work with families that have experienced what I have, then absolutely I want to be a part of that. And so the initial goals really were simple. It was, how do we provide wraparound services? Meaning we're not just saying come to Harbison West or go to Irmo Middle School or go to Crossroads. We want to bring service providers on site for families, just because many of them just lack resource and access. So that was one major piece. And then the second piece to that was ensuring and creating opportunities for students who live in that community to have access to high quality after school programs, summer programs, were the 2 primary goals that I was charged with.
And so talk to me about your first steps, because you and I both know that communities have love-hate relationships with schools and school districts. Right. And So there has to be work done just as you as the individual. So what were your personal first steps to jump into that community and start building that bridge to where they would trust you?
Yeah, so the very first thing that I had to consider was just community mapping, right? As a school principal, there was a network that I had. We were a magnet school, so typically my network included folks that were within the realm of environmental sciences. But obviously moving to a systems-based, you got to expand who you know, your networks, who you frequent with. But one of the very first conversations that I had after just looking at who's who, first conversation I had was with the South Carolina Baptist Convention. That may seem crazy, but it's not. So they have Hearts for Schools. And so they have a database of who are all the local churches within your area that support schools, right? And so my very first meeting was in September of 2023. And Pastor Don up at Gateway Baptist, he did us a solid. And he said, hey, Julius, we absolutely will be responsible for collecting a group of preachers just to talk about where you are and what you're seeking to do and what you want to accomplish. And so that was our first conversation. And I shared a text or two questions that guided my work. There's a book entitled Know What You Are For by Mr. Anderson. And he poses two questions to church members, but it's bigger than that. And those two questions are, what do you want to be known for? And what are you actually known for? Yeah. That's just two powerful questions, right? Like, we think we're known for this, but would the community say the same thing? And so I made that pitch to, this group of great men of God and great women of God who said, man, we think that's something that we could support. We think that we can align with that. As you continue to build this program out, tell us how we can support that. And so that was the very first meeting. And then, of course, as you talk, and that leads to, hey, we think you should meet this person. Or I got a friend, we think you should meet that person. And so ultimately, that branched out to meeting and talking with as many different community stakeholders as possible, whether that included service clubs, whether that included philanthropists. It just continued to branch out in terms of the folks that are in the community, because you gotta build it. In order to build it, people need to know the why behind what you're doing and not just the what. And I think it's also important to note that part of our messaging was and continues to be that this is a dialogue and not a monologue. Like, we did not want our conversation to be, here's just what we're telling you that we're doing. We're shutting everything off. And, oh, by the way, we need money from you. Like, my conversation is not about give us money. It really isn't. It's about, this is what we want to be about. If this sounds like something that you would support, then hopefully there's an opportunity for us to work together in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And as this was progressing at the same time, like when you, David, and I talked, you start realizing there's different needs, right? And not all of the needs are for the students, because in order to get people to keep moving up in life and to start breaking out of generational poverty or poverty as a whole, you realize like they need to be financially educated. There's this, there's that. And so could you talk about, like, because I know you've started going into the neighborhood and doing stuff like that, but also, like, what's the future plan hold for you in terms of growing that side of it and different aspects just outside of helping the students themselves?
Yeah, ultimately, in order to support students, you have to support families, right? I mean, sure, we can provide after school, but what kind of conversations are we having with families? And then how do we ensure that we're locked in on the needs that parents have? So we are out in the Harbison Gardens community at a minimum of once a month with just engagement conversations and discussions. But the very first meeting that we held, it was entitled Hopes and Dreams. Because I did not want to come in saying, hey, oh, by the way, I'm a former school principal. And like, nobody cares about that, man. Like, nobody cares about your title and what you've done. They just want to know, are you interested in who we are? Do you believe that we have the capacity to be better than we are? And do you care? And so I just wanted to know, what were people's hopes and dreams? I'm a father of two young girls, a 6th grader and an 8th grader. And here's what I'll tell you, George, and I mentioned this to you all. The hopes and dreams that the families have for their children are no different than the hopes and dreams that I have for my two girls. Ultimately, you want your kids to be safe emotionally and physically. You want your people to be hard workers. You want them to have opportunities to do well in life. You want them to be creators and problem solvers. And so I think by opening up with that, I think that just allowed walls to come down, right? Like this, okay, this guy's a little different. Like he's not asking us about our past and what's our credit score and why are you in the situation at the end. Like nobody cares about that. Ultimately, dude, we want to see our kids do well and we want to do well. And so we were able to get families to tell us, like, if we could provide support and we can bring providers in, help us to identify the things that you need versus us coming in saying, oh, we know what's best for you. And we're going to bring in something that you don't necessarily need.
So y'all got everything you've had these initial meetings and you get everything going.
Right.
What were some of the early things that you beyond these monthly meetings, that you've done in there, and how has it grown? Like what other things now are you addressing?
Yeah. So the very first thing that we decided to tackle about 3 months into the job was hosting a block party in the Harbison Gardens community. And I did not come up with that idea as a former principal. I had a reading interventionist who was a finalist for District Teacher of the Year this past year who approached me with the idea, Mr. Scott, what if we went into the 3 biggest communities that serve this, Dutch Fork Elementary? And once I got into that position, like that was a no-brainer. Like, well, what if we hosted a block party in the community for several reasons? One, if the goal is to say we want to provide wraparound services, this offers that. But we also believe that we want to develop healthy and positive relationships with families. Well, one way to do that is to say, we're not just talking, we're going to actually be here. And we're not just going to show up once. We're here for the long haul. So our very first block party was able to talk to a couple of people. We were able to get 14 vendors to come out. And so this included healthy learners. This included some departments from our office, early childhood, parenting services. This included a couple of churches. And I will tell you the energy was absolutely insane. I think it was an eye-opener for everybody involved, not just for the residents, but I think also for the community. Because I think there was a perception like, oh my gosh, if you go out there, are you not afraid that you'll come back alive? And I'm like, unfortunately, I'm not. And so that was in the fall. Again, 14 vendors. We had, Kona Ice. We had a live DJ. We had some giveaways. But our goal was always to host 2 of those. And so we went from 14 in the fall in terms of vendors to 28 in the spring. Obviously the word began to grow and people are saying like, okay, like you really are making a difference out here. And the byproduct of having those block parties then included families taking advantage of the people that were coming. And then folks saying, well, hey, Mr. Scott, we don't want to just come out for a block party. We want to actually come out and be a regular part of what's happening in the community. So one of those partners includes the Richland County Public Library. They host and provide a pop-up 4K van. Well, that's huge in terms of child readiness. And so we were able to identify how many kids do we have that live in this community that are under the age of 5 and that are not in a school at all. And so now what Richland County Public Library said is we will provide this van every other week from March till May of this past spring. So where does that go moving forward? We're going to start the year off this coming September with that pop-up 4K van coming out to Harbison Gardens. And our most recent visit, we must have had at least 10 children between the ages of 1 to 4 years old, 3 years old who are not in the program. So that's the whole purpose of what we're doing is providing access. And if kids can get exposure to books and texts long before they walk into a school, we know that they'll fare much, much better. That's just one example.
Yeah. And so you've also grown into, and I want to hit on the healthy eating piece, and providing access to healthy foods, because nutrition plays a role in readiness for school too. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Absolutely. So when we planned the original and the very first block party, there was an invitation for Food Share to attend. So Food Share is an organization that is absolutely committed to providing access to high quality fruit and veggies to underserved communities. And we were unable to get them initially, but thankfully our coordinator of student nutrition, she's well connected to that group. And we reached back out to say, hey, we think we have a great opportunity. Here's the work that we're doing. So we had an initial conversation, and they were like, listen, there's no reason why Harbison Gardens could not become a partner site for us, which means we set up an opportunity where families have access to the menu of produce and veggies that they have available. There are 2 windows of time to place an order. And then we work with partners to say, let's pick up the produce and then we'll deliver it to Harbison Gardens. And so with that process, they can use an EBT card to get a big box of produce, which is about 18 pounds at $15, a medium box for $10, and a small box for $5. So and not only does it give them access, but they provide recipes that are on the box as well. So it's not just here you go. It's also educating folks on here may be some ways that you can prepare or utilize these foods in ways that you just don't know. So that's an important piece, David. And I would say we also have a grant that allows us to become a distributor. So for our fall block party, we will have a fresh market.
Nice.
And so students and families will have an opportunity to pick from fresh produce, because as you said, like, sure, we can provide after school care and we can provide things to enrich them academically in books, but if they're eating poorly and nutrition is not, up to par, then all the other stuff really is canceled or minimized.
So you've been talking about project after project after project, and there's so much going on. So I kind of have like 2 questions to go with it. What's been the hardest part about this role so far? And then also over time, what do you see like as an upcoming challenge, and what could the community do to help support you so this can continue to grow?
Yeah, I think a part of it is changing perceptions both externally and internally. Like, I got an external audience, like, why are you doing what you're doing and why is this important to us? But also there's an internal audience, right? Like, we don't get a chance to catch every family that's out there. And so, yes, we've had an impact, but certainly we have not reached 150 families as of yet. And just helping people to understand, again, we're not just out here because it sounds good or we're trying to impress you. Like, we're here for the long haul. And I think the more we continue to do, then it's like, okay, yeah, y'all are doing this. And yeah, y'all are doing this. And yeah, you're doing that. So now when we say, here's what's coming up, the goal is that we put in enough credibility that we have followed through in such a way. If we said we're going to do it and make it happen, folks can take it to the bank, right? I'm not E.F. Hutton, but they say when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. We just want we want our work to speak for us, that if we make a declaration of here's what's about to happen, people have full confidence of they're going to make it happen.
Well, it's important. Again, you go back to that trust, right?
Right.
You tell them what you're going to do, and then you deliver, and then you deliver more than what you really set out to do.
Right.
And then so hats off to you and everything that you do. So now, what's next? How does this role continue? How does this project grow? Do you expect to look at another neighborhood?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The ultimate goal, and I didn't say this up front, the ultimate goal was to start in one community or a section of our district. And the goal is to say, how do we take what we're doing and replicate that in other parts of our district? And so that still remains our ultimate goal. But there's so much more work that can be done where we are, that we really want to get this model going in such a way that by the time we're ready to expand, we'll be smoking, that we will just have a better idea of all the things that it takes. Now, each community is not the same. And so we recognize that even with expansion or scaling, the dynamics will be different. Yeah. But we don't want to jettison at this point and say, well, sure, we've had a few wins this year. Now let's move to the next community. It's now saying, beyond just after school and fresh fruit and access, is really looking at a comprehensive approach. How do we support kids literally from the time they're born to the time that they graduate from high school? And that was not the initial aim when I got started. It was like, hey, let's do a vertical process. Like, how do we support kids from the start of the day to the end of the day versus how do we support them from the start of their life to the time that they finish our system?
Right.
And one of the things I think like David and I like really, when you came and spoke at Optimist the first time, this was, I can't remember how long ago
January.
it was now. Yeah.
January.
So you had said that it wasn't like money is great, right? And like you could always use money to do more projects, but what you actually need is like the community involvement. You need resources, you need that network, right? So what are you looking for in the community, and how can they help you so that Harbison Garden is almost like a community project? Because I know you have the block party, but if people want to become involved in the block party, like how do they go about doing that?
No, I think that's a great question. I appreciate you posing it. I think that's why this notion of us saying we want to support kids from birth to high school graduation, that allows us to develop way more partners into the conversation. Because there are some people like, hey, we're not really interested in what happens in after school, but we are interested in professional and career development, and how might we serve you there, right? So, hello?
You're there.
I'm sorry. My screen just, hold on, it says reload. Hold on. Okay, there we go. I'm not sure what happened. Yeah. And so I think by us being very specific to say, here are all the ways that we're supporting kids in this community. So you might be first steps that you're interested in on how do we provide parenting skills. Well, we got you. We're interested in housing, right? So how do we help families to develop the skill sets to be in a position to purchase their own house? That's where you guys come in, right? So I think it's helping people understand that it's not just one thing we're after. We're looking at a comprehensive approach to really change the outcomes for all families. And I think by being intentional with that, that gives people greater opportunities to say, here's how I think I might be able to fit in and support y'all's work.
That's awesome. So if somebody has heard something today that kind of strikes a chord with them and they want to reach out to you at the district to support your work and get involved in your work, how can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So cell phone is probably the best avenue. Obviously, email is great. My email is jscott@lexrich5.org. jscott@lexrich5.org. And my work cell is 803-609-9542. Surefire way is definitely just phone, just because we're always on the move. We're always out in the community. Like if I'm sitting in this office, then that's a problem. This is not designed to be just here in the space. So my goal is to be out and about as much as possible.
Is sponsored by Bell Carrington, Price and Gregg. Bell Carrington is our choice for the best real estate attorneys in town. They are highly communicative and make sure that the closing process is as smooth as possible. With offices in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama, they can handle any of your real estate, finance, eminent domain, financial services litigation, and litigation needs. Call their Columbia SC office today at 803-509-5078.